We are golden. Greetings. Welcome to
Good morning.
another episode of Geddry and Jericho. We're going to touch on several topics today, but I'm here with my co-host, Israel, and I think we're going to start off with Israel discussing the election results from last night.
Yeah. So the Coos County special district elections just completed yesterday, and it looks like we had somewhere around 3,500 ballots turned in that ballpark. The results across the board seem to be pretty split. A lot of the races were uncontested, and so in uncontested races, of course, the candidate who had a name in the race came out on top, and I didn't see any write-ins put up enough votes to overcome that. But there were several contested races, including school board elections, some fire department elections, South Coast Education District, and Bay Area Health District contested
Hospital
elections.
district, right.
And this, as we know, this election cycle, these are nonpartisan positions, but we saw we're starting to see the influence of partisan politics in nonpartisan positions, starting with candidates who've organized from the right and are running as conservatives and getting the support then from the local GOP and other conservative outlets and organizing groups. And then the response to that partisan effort was a kind of ramshackle effort on the part of centrists and liberals to organize some kind of support, counterpartisan support for nonpartisan candidates to try to preserve the nonpartisan nature of these positions. And the way that shook out is I looked at 11 contested races. Only 3 of those races actually had overt support from liberal centrists. And so you had 11 contested races that were supported from the far right, and 3 of those had somewhat partisan support from the Coos Dems. And so out of those 11, the far right won 6 of those, and then 5 of them went to the centrist and liberal, the nonpartisans, we should say, because while they had centrist and liberal support, they didn't actually run on a partisan platform the way that the right did. 2 of those contested races that went to the right were a Lakeside Fire District. It'll be interesting to see what it means for a conservative to run a fire district from a conservative standpoint. I'm not sure what they're going to do. Are they going to privatize it? No, it's volunteer fire departments. No, wait, no, that would be sick.
Refuse federal funding.
Yeah, I don't know what that means, but I think what it does mean is, that these people are now serving in public office. They're going to have that experience under them, and it'll be interesting to see if they're using that as a stepping stone towards further office in the future. So that's worth looking into. I think the most concerning victories on the part of the far right were the position 3 and position 7 in the North Bend School District, because those are pretty far right candidates who've been platformed by anti-trans, transphobic, and homophobic outrage outlets, the Rob Taylor Report, and they've been more than happy to receive that support. And it's concerning to see what they might do with that district. They're going to have a lot of say over who gets hired as the superintendent at the North Bend School District, and we already know how much the LGBTQ students in that district are struggling to just be allowed to be themselves in that setting. So hopefully there will be enough community support around those kids and around kids who are experiencing poverty and homelessness, and around kids who have special needs and developmental disabilities, so that those kids who might otherwise get sidelined, marginalized, or fall through the cracks are getting the support that they need, and that the school board is hearing the community's concerns and responding to the community's demands for those kids' sakes. Obviously, to allow them to have the same access and opportunity and education that every other kid has, not to give them more or better than the other kids, but to make sure that the school board is
Right.
attending to all of the kids in the district, not just the ones that follow their religion or fit their ideal of what a model future citizen should look like or act like. So that's a concern. We did see that Nathan McClintock, who's a City of Coos Bay attorney, has daughters who are in, I think, freshman daughters in the North Bend School District. Mm-hmm. He did win his election, and he's a strong leader. He's got a lot of, I think, he takes a very reasonable approach to the issues, and he has the right priorities. And so I think that he'll be a really good influence on that board. Coos Bay had a contested election. Coos Bay School District had a contested election with Addie Hutchinson running, and then the far right was running a man named, I think, Jim Kingsley, and Addie Hutchinson won her election pretty handily. That's good news for the Coos Bay School District. All the other contested elections around, like the airport district and the transportation district, were split. So the right one, if they had two candidates running, one of them won, the other lost, that kind of thing. Right. So we get to see some good candidates like Mike Clausen have won their races, and so that's how the election went. It's an even split without a whole lot of organizing on the part of the broader moderate and liberal public. The far right did win a few more seats than I think the average public servant kind of person. But I think with some effort and organizing going forward in the future, we might be able to stem this tide of mainstreaming fringe views.
You called it in our earlier podcast when you said that one of those races against Carol Yardley, who's an extreme right candidate, we're going to get split. And if you sum up the votes of those two,
so Kira Kadir and they would have been Adam, it was a three-way race.
Yeah.
So if there was only one candidate opposing Carol Yardley, we're not sure for sure. For example, like I think Elliot Adams got somewhere around 350 votes, and Hira got somewhere around 1,175 votes, and that would have been enough to put Hira. If all of the votes that went to Elliot went to Hira, or all of the votes that went to Hira went to Elliot, that would have been enough to put that candidate over the top of the 1,500 some votes that Carol Yardley got. But we don't know for sure that if the third candidate wasn't in the race, if all of those votes would have went to the other. We don't know how those votes would have gone.
We don't know.
So we can't know for sure whether that three-way race split the vote in a way that would have resulted in a nonpartisan candidate winning the election. But it does show that without a concerted and organized effort, like from the get-go, that these people who are running for nonpartisan offices from a partisan position and operating as if they are partisan do have an election advantage. And I think that's why I'm predicting that going forward into the future, we're going to see more and more of nonpartisan races becoming more overtly partisan. And I don't think that's avoidable because of the kind of cultural political climate that we're in. And it's becoming more and more polarized, so that even fire districts are becoming partisan races for some reason. And that's being driven again by the agenda of the far right extremist fringe to try to gain power in every possible office they can, and it's part of the culture war. Basically, the strategy of the far right has been this awareness that they're losing the cultural war in the public sphere. They've been losing in the market. They've been losing in the arts, so that you have Hollywood and corporate culture. All of that is shifting to reflect the demographic changes of our country. So they're becoming more open to queer rights, trans rights, gay rights, that sort of thing. They're becoming more open to that, which is something the far right has opposed for decades. They're becoming much more open to women's rights, especially reproductive health rights, and that's been something that the far right has opposed for decades. And they're becoming much more interested in having policies around diversity, equity, and inclusion that recognize that there are historical, economic, material, and cultural disadvantages to people who've suffered under racist policies, sexist policies, and homophobic policies, and that through these kinds of efforts, they can try to give these people equal opportunity with people who haven't suffered from those policies.
Yeah.
The far right has opposed that for decades. And so
Yeah.
they're becoming less and less influential in our society, as we see not only are the demographics of our country changing and the demographics of our market, and of course, the kind of messaging coming out of our cultural outlets like Hollywood and the arts. They're feeling like the only battleground that they have left to try to stem this tide of cultural change is by taking control of the state. And if they can take control of the state, then they can start to ban these kinds of things. And we've seen that in Florida, right? We've seen like the don't say gay bills, and now we've seen the let them die bill just passed. The effort is to turn the state into an institution of cultural influence, which is very fascist. And so that's where the strategy of the far right is to take every possible political position, turn it into a far right ideological position, and then leverage that to try to change or stem the tide of cultural change. And the only way to do that is to basically have to completely abandon their ideas of small government, completely abandon the idea of government not being involved in the personal lives of citizens, and instead to make government this authoritarian system that indoctrinates kids in far-right ideologies, that basically leverages the state as a tool of their culture war. And our job, I think, as people who are interested in democracy and interested in government not interfering in the personal perspectives and daily lives of our citizens, and to allow people as much freedom as possible, is to try to stem this tide and try to turn this tide back so that these nonpartisan positions, so that the function of government continues to serve all people, all citizens, and let people make their own decisions about their religion, their own decisions about their bodies, their own decisions about their identity, and have the freedom to work and live and love in America as in a way that is as free as possible without interfering with or harming our neighbors. So it's a struggle, and that's the struggle of our time.
Yeah, it's definitely a struggle. I was going to throw into that mix that parents should be able to choose what books their children read, and not some school board.
That's the thing. We do have to have some kind of, recognition that curriculums, when it comes to school curriculums, that you want material that's going to be appropriate to the age and learning level of the students. But when it comes to what the kids can check out of the library, what they can find in the library, parents should have and should be involved in their kids, in the content their kids are accessing, whether it's from a library or whether it's from online social media or other online sources. The difference is, what we have from the far right is this intention of giving far right conservative parents power over what every other parent in the district can allow their kids to see. So rather than each parent having responsibility over their own kids, they're giving power to far right conservative parents, far right, Christian nationalist and white nationalist parents, control over what every other parent has access to in terms of what they allow their kids to see. So that's what these book bans are doing. They're basically denying parents their rights and saying, no, actually, the only parents who have any real influence on what kids can read are these conservative religious
board
parents.
members. Yeah.
And then they're going to interfere with every parent who doesn't have the same perspective and wants their kids to have access to other kinds of things. So that a children's story about two male penguins who hatch an egg together and raise a baby penguin together is banned because homophobic parents are concerned that's indoctrinating kids to recognize that two males can have a family. And you know what? I think that parents should be allowed. Parents can make those decisions for their kids. I was raised. I think it's going to backfire. I was raised in that kind of homophobic, conservative household, and the more, to quote Star Wars, the more you tighten your grasp, the more star systems fall through your fingers. Basically, the more that they try to limit knowledge and the more they try to limit access to information in an age of extremely accessible information with the internet and everything like that, the more kids are going to find out that they're being lied to by their parents. They're having information denied them by their parents. And once they hit that age where they start to form their own sense of self and rebellion, that's going to be one of the ways they rebel. And so I do think it'll backfire just naturally. We're Americans. We don't really respond well to being told what we can and can't do, what we can access and what we can't access. And so I do think that these parents and their efforts are going to backfire culturally. But I do think that it's going to be a long struggle, because if they are holding state power and wielding state power, which includes the state's legitimacy to exercise violence on its citizens, then we're going to see where this is going to be a really difficult conflict.
I agree with that 100%. I will tell you, I checked the 22, I guess it was about 10 o'clock last night, the updated results, which are not final, but in the 10,000 plus people voted, and around the county. And if Elliott Adams and Hira Kadir had combined their votes, they still wouldn't have had over 50%, but Yardley only has 49.24%, and they would have had, I don't have my glasses on, but I think they would have had a few tenths of a percentage point more.
That's right. We discussed that already, that we don't really know which way the votes would have gone, but
we don't know which way it would have gone.
I think even if the outcome of this election had been more lopsided, and it wasn't, I think it was very evenly split. Even if it had been more lopsided, it would not have ended the challenges that we're facing as a community and the challenges we're facing as a nation. So I think that's one of the important roles that we play as this kind of independent media commentary and voice is an analysis, is that we have to keep people informed. We have to keep talking about these kinds of issues. I don't know that we need to always be partisan or always be promoting our own personal ideologies. I know that's one of the things that I'm withholding, because the main concern here is to preserve the American way of allowing for a diversity of perspectives to have opportunity in the public sphere. And so what we're doing is we're really just resisting this authoritarian push from the far right to reduce the American freedom of public discourse and public perspective and that sort of thing. And we've seen them use the doublespeak of promoting free speech and and of course protecting kids and shit like that. But we recognize that when it comes down to the policies that they're promoting, the messaging that they're promoting, they're actually restricting free speech. They're actually not interested in protecting kids at all. They're actually just using these messaging tools to advance an agenda that does very much the opposite. So we have to continue to resist from all perspectives, whether that's conservative or liberal or left. We have to be all collectively working on resisting this kind of far right reactionary messaging and political movement, because it doesn't actually serve the interests of conservatives or liberals or leftists.
It's not pro democracy.
It's it's the very much anti-democracy, and so we do have to continue to resist. I think that we're going to find that we have allies in that effort across the political spectrum, because I do think, even though there is a major cultural transition within the conservative movement, there are still a lot of conservatives who are still committed to Republican ideology and the ideology of a meritocracy, the ideology that every person is equal and that no person should have advantage over another person. Everyone should have a voice. Everyone, that kind of and the idea of personal responsibility and personal equality, that this far right fringe actually does not believe, and it's actually interested in promoting and protecting the interest of a small group of people with what they would consider to be natural advantages over everybody else, and therefore give those people more power. So I think that we do have a broader base of ideological support against this movement, and I think that the important thing that we do is recognize that, leverage that, and not create enemies where we can create friends.
Absolutely. I wanted to share a little adventure I've had the last couple of days.
Yeah, related to that, not make enemies where we can make friends kind of thing.
Yeah. My sweet old dad, who will be 94 at the end of June, my son was visiting and took him to lunch, and I think they were at the little Irish pub in Bandon, and my dad picked up, because for those of you who are watching on YouTube, I'm holding up a copy of the latest print edition of Geddry, and since my dad knew I am doing that, he saw this edition of the Patriot Press Coos News. So the Patriot Press Coos News is a local effort by a woman named Diane Rich. Diane Rich she applied first for the interim position of county clerk when Debbie Heller retired in the middle of her term, and she apparently didn't know a lot about the thing, because her interview and the questions that she was asked lasted a whole 10 minutes. It's not that she was limited to 10 minutes, she just didn't have anything else to offer to the conversation. And so she was not chosen. And as we know, Dee Dee Murphy was chosen, and Dee Dee had worked in the clerk's office for many years, so she was uniquely qualified. She had no interest in running for it, but the county was in a pickle, and she stepped up. But Dee Dee has been, at the time, she was like the co-chair of the Democratic Central Committee in Coos County, and which she resigned when she took the clerk's job. But these conservatives were convinced that having a Democrat was going to be unethical. She's also, along with, it would have been better to have a conservative like Diane Rich in there. That would have been more ethical. But anyway.
Yeah, it's only ethical if it's their party. Well, it's a matter of trust. We have a polarized political environment.
Yeah.
They're going to, by nature, they're going to trust their own, and they're going to distrust the opposite party. And I think we feel the same way. I think in terms of, I'm not a Democrat, but I'm going to trust people who have this perspective on how government should function on behalf of everybody, and I'm not going to
Yeah.
trust the people who are trying to promote government that doesn't function for everyone, but just functions for a particular ideological mindset. So I understand that distrust, but at the same time, like, that's why we have a system that has enforcement of checks and balances.
Well,
But they operate with those election denial conspiracy theories, and they leverage that to create even more distrust, and then you create this huge conflict that I know that Dee Dee Murphy had to deal with.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, continue.
So anyway, I had heard that she, in addition, Dee Dee Murphy, along with a failed candidate for the Coos County Commission position, she ran against incumbent John Sweet. Her name was Pam Lewis. The pair of them filed a very frivolous.
Hold on. I think you misspoke. You said Dee Dee Murphy joined with Pam Lewis, and I think you mean Diane Rich joined with Pam Lewis in that lawsuit.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. You're absolutely right. Diane Rich and Pam Lewis sued the county and set up a funding site where they claimed to be victims of election fraud. And so far, they've grifted about almost $1,900 on that site. And they filed this lawsuit. They filed a lawsuit. I'll bring this up a little bit later. But anyway, they filed a lawsuit accusing the county of all kinds of heinous crimes, and expected that the legal system would go out and prove all of their allegations. That's not what the legal system is there for, but
that's not how that works. Oh gosh.
But anyway, it was thrown out. I'm bringing it up because she mentions it in this thing, and I'll give it some honorable mention in a minute. But the case was thrown out for lack of merit, amongst other things. And so anyway, my dad thoughtfully brings me this copy of the Patriot Press Coos News, Spring 2023. And there's a little flower thing that says May, so I'm assuming it's the May edition. And it is just so bad. She's opposing habitat conservation. She blames the spotted owl for starving children.
Wait a minute, the spotted owl, isn't that a 90s issue? I'm sorry, I don't know. I didn't know if the spotted owl was still an issue for timber.
Apparently to her. And
so some people, I think, might have been stuck in the timber and environmental conflict of the 90s. My dad worked in the timber industry, so I remember the spotted owl issue. I don't know if the spotted owl thing is still an issue, because I know that environmentalism and conservation has moved beyond just one species. There's a lot of threatened species in our.
I think they've added the marbled murrelet to the list.
And of course, kids are starving because of this.
Yeah.
Jesus.
And because we can't just cut down every single tree and so forth.
That's not how the market works.
She's got a discussion in here that blames George Soros and his Open Society for turning schools into indoctrination playgrounds. She considers gender modification, child sexual mutilation.
Which doesn't happen, which absolutely does not happen.
Yeah. She goes on about the North Bend furries. She's claiming that children are hissing and scratching in the hallways, and that there's litter boxes in the bathrooms, which
is a hoax.
Someone who actually works there, and in fact had advertised in this paper, confirmed that, or I guess the owner's wife works at the school and can confirm that there are no litter boxes in the
right, yeah. The whole kids identifying as cats and litter boxes in bathrooms thing was a hoax that got picked up by the far right as part of their transphobic conspiracy moral panic stuff. And there's just no credibility to it. I think the misunderstanding might arise from the little cat ear hair things that
Yeah,
some kids wear, and the interest in from I think probably from Japanese anime in
yeah,
cat girls and other characters like that
yeah,
that kids relate to and identify with, but not in the same way that in terms of like actual like personal identity,
yeah.
but more in the terms of play. When I played and pretend to be a dinosaur when I was a kid. So that got blown
Exactly.
out of proportion because they're trying to use this kind of stuff to create a moral panic and ridicule trans, including transgender children. So that's messed up.
Yeah, she says in here, she, she blames that's later in a different article, but she blames the devaluation of the US dollar on trans children. She says
That's
that
just interesting.
our schools should stop encouraging dangerous mental health issues and must stop becoming drag queen and pedophile playgrounds. And I'm sure you were going to just point out that the US dollar is actually pretty strong right now.
Right. We are facing with the US dollar, there is, in terms of the future, there does seem to be some uncertainty, but it
Oh,
has
sure.
obviously nothing to do with the culture wars, and it has to do with
Yeah,
how,
right.
it has to do with how the United States backs its debt and whether or not, for example, up and coming, whether or not we choose to raise the debt ceiling, as well as our our the worldwide trust in our dollar. We're involved in a pretty major economic conflict with two other major global powers.
Economies.
And one of
Right,
them is
right.
China, which is ascendant, and one of them is Russia, which is desperate and descendant.
Yeah,
And
right.
so I think that what we're going to see is that some of the countries are going to start economically aligning themselves with China, and we're going to see some challenges to whether or not the dollar continues to be the default in terms of world trading conspiracy. Another factor in that is cryptocurrency,
Oh,
made
yeah,
up money,
yeah.
but none of it has anything to do with like this
Yeah.
this
Well,
cultural transition we have around gender.
so I dropped out. I dropped out of economics in college because at the time I was a young mother, but that's not an excuse. But I decided the dismal science really wasn't what I wanted to
Yeah,
do. But it's
I don't think that's
interesting.
a concern when it's like Diane Rich promoting. I don't think that person ever passed economics, so she doesn't understand how the county clerk's office works. I don't think she understands how
Yeah.
the economy works. But again,
So
this is probably just regurgitating some conservative, or not even conservative, let's be clear, some fringe far extremist talking points, propaganda points, stuff like that.
she's
It's pretty
a
spurious.
total cliche. I think I wrote a little piece about all this, and I said about the only thing she didn't do was take a selfie with a tinfoil hat while
Oh,
wearing a tinfoil hat.
oh.
And then she would have just been about there. But and she also does that rallying cry, "Let's go, Brandon!"
I don't know why people
and
can't just come out and say "fuck Joe Biden" like the rest of us.
yeah,
I,
yeah,
I,
you know,
I don't. I do know some liberals who really like the Bidens and are.
yeah.
I think there's a sense of relief on the part of a lot of liberals about the Biden administration in comparison with the previous one.
Oh,
But
sure, yeah.
for the critical left, no, nobody on the left
He,
likes
he's a
Biden.
in my opinion, Joe Biden is a radical centrist, and centrists, effectively stand for almost nothing. But he has accomplished a few things, and he's conducted himself way better than the previous administration. But I want to point out that this thing is rife with grammatical and spelling errors,
Oh,
and
they need an
that,
editor. I wonder if I should volunteer to be an editor for them.
yeah, she needs one, for sure. She and she even misspelled Brandon.
Oh,
Let's
oh,
go,
oh,
Brandon. And
that's
so in this article, in this issue, she brings up the Lewis and Rich versus Coos County. And,
mm,
and I can't help. I use this term a lot, so I'm not trying to create a pun, but it's rich. that, that she brings this up and she says, we were unable to get our case in front of a jury. And then she says, and after watching all the other election integrity cases fail to get a jury, Pam and I, which is more than 70 across the country, were all thrown out for lack of evidence.
Carrie Lake's got one going in Arizona, it sounds like. So she's
Okay,
going to get
she
in
may
trouble.
have it.
One of her 7 claims got pushed forward to actual trial.
Okay, okay.
The other 6 got dismissed out of hand
But there were
ridiculous.
there were 70 the last
Mhm.
time I did a count, which was a few months ago, and they were all thrown out. So there may be some subsequent ones, but she says since they've all been thrown out, the odds are not in favor. So they've decided to join a class action put on by Mark Thielman, who's got a case going up in the Portland area, Multnomah, I think.
Okay.
And to me, it's like all those cases were thrown out for the same reason that your case was thrown out, lack of substance.
Right. They're not going to. They're not.
Wouldn't it like dawn on you that maybe you're just wrong?
No, that doesn't dawn on them. They're going to find an alternate explanation, and the default will be there has to be a conspiracy then, because they can't accept the possibility that they just don't know how things work and that they're wrong. So yeah, they're going to default to conspiracy theory thinking.
So she ends this article with the message we want to send to the county clerk's office is, we are watching. We are paying attention.
Watching and paying attention, but we don't have a clue how things work, so we're going to come up with some
we don't
really
have any
bizarre
idea
analyses.
what we're doing.
It's like, yeah, it would be great if you did understand the system, if you did understand how things actually worked, then by all means watch and hold accountable. But if you don't understand the system, then your capacity to hold them accountable is severely diminished, and you can bring these cases that don't have any credibility, and they're going to get thrown out, which means your capacity to hold that government structure accountable is really being debilitated by your own lack of knowledge. And I think that's not good for any of us. I would much prefer that, even if they're coming from a conservative point of view, if they actually understood how elections operated, they actually understood the processes, then they could watch and they could check. And if they were the sort that were actually had integrity and were honest, then they could do an honest accounting and make sure that those systems were accountable. But since they don't and they can't and they aren't, they end up having these frivolous lawsuits. And I think then it becomes the responsibility on the part of those of us who might actually be grateful for the public service and function of the county clerk's office. We still have to do our diligence to make sure that they're accountable. Because nobody else is doing that from a standpoint of understanding and knowledge, because they don't get it. So those guys, it is disappointing.
Those people were heroes. What they endured so much harassment and character assassination from people like this woman who has no clue what she's doing or saying. I have to throw in a funny here. She's got an ad. So I focused on the advertisers. Like who the hell is paying her money to produce this crap? And she had a bunch of advertisers, and some of them are the usuals, and some of them she might even have comped them. I suspect that's true with Rob Taylor. She's promoting the Rob Taylor report.
I don't have any. It doesn't surprise me. They're pretty much the same person.
Avery Plumbing, which is Stan Avery.
I don't know who that is.
He's one of them.
So he's
One of the
another far right person. Okay.
yeah, citizens are starting. So anyway, I'm not going to list everybody that's in here, but one of them was Carol Yardley running for the North Bend School Board.
Mm-hmm.
And on the website for Coos News, she took it down, but she had an ad or an endorsement of Carol Yardley. And it was like, there were so many misspellings and so many, and you're saying, honestly, who wrote this? Because whoever wrote this has no business near a school, or
All
they
right.
should
Well,
be a
if anyone
student.
right now, if anyone who's connected with Diane Rich encounters this podcast and is interested in finding someone who can help Diane with spelling and grammar and editing, just let them know that I have those skills. I can work on that with her.
Good.
I mean, I
Anyway,
might want
so
some compensation for the effort because it sounds like it's going to be a big effort.
I would not do it for free. Yeah, don't. Yeah. Anyway, so I was literally appalled that there were local businesses that would support this kind of attack on kids, in our schools. And I really was.
Yeah.
And I shared it with a few people, and they were all equally appalled. So I wrote an article about it, and I listed the advertisers who were in here, and that why are these people spending their advertising budget to support this kind of misinformation, malinformation, whatever you want to call it. I posted it on my blog and I shared it on Facebook. And what we haven't shared on the podcast yet is that it's not official till June 1st, but we've taken over stewardship.
K-Vision, the radio station, has
KVZN, the radio station, which we're still raising funds.
That's official as of the date that contract was, or that bill of sale was signed. So
Okay.
K-Vision does actually have administrative and editorial control over Oregon's Bay Area Facebook page.
Right.
And then there's going to be a contract to an administrator of that page, so that K-Vision is not the representatives
dealing with the
K-Vision
day-to-day stuff.
aren't dealing with the day-to-day stuff of that page because it's a lot of work. And so there's a person contracted to handle the administration and editorial content of the page. Their contract begins on June 1st, but they're already operating in that capacity.
And so Oregon's Bay Area shared my article, and I didn't realize until late yesterday afternoon that they had shared it, and they had added a little headline about boycotting some of these businesses.
It called for an official OBA boycott or something like that, which I think is K-Vision didn't really have any say in that headline. And then it also listed in the post, it listed the businesses that were listed in the article and was calling for a boycott. I mean, without having first checked whether those businesses were actually ideologically aligned with the content of Patriot Press, which I think most of them probably aren't, or at least a significant portion of them are.
Well, I'm pretty sure several of them are, but
obviously Rob Taylor Report and it sounds like Avery Plumbing and things, but
and I think even Johnson Rock has a full back page thing.
I think reaching out to some of these businesses and finding out would be a pretty useful activity at this point.
Well, but, they've reached out to me.
Some of them have,
Some of them have. Some of them haven't.
Seeing their names on OBA was probably pretty scary.
And three, I guess it's okay to mention who they are. Three. So one of them, the first one that we heard from, was Y Marina, which is an outfit that sells boating supplies and engines and services and so forth. And they had actually read this when it came out and were as appalled as I was. And they had already, on May 5th, before I ever wrote my piece, had already terminated their relationship with the publication, and they
did some
realized that
diligence. They did some
yeah,
a little after
yeah,
the
they
fact, but
realized,
still after the
yeah,
fact, but still due diligence.
they realized that they had made a big mistake, and in fact, it was the wife of the owner of this business that made it clear to Diane Rich that there are no litter boxes in the bathrooms at the schools, and so
I wonder
kudos.
if Ms. Rich will publish a retraction.
I don't know. So
I doubt it. I doubt it.
So 2 more businesses got their knickers in a twist. One of them was Masco Properties, and she has actually had a fairly long-standing relationship with Diane Rich. Rich manages her website for her, and I think she's advertised in the Coos News in previous issues. I haven't read those previous issues, but a friend of mine had picked up a couple of copies, and they were by no means as bad as this particular issue. So this was my first. This was my first introduction to the Patriot Press Coos News, and
yeah. My knowledge of Masco Properties and the people that work for them is generally they're pretty solid people, like good community presence and positive vibes. So seeing Masco Properties on that publication was an absolute surprise to me.
So she reached out and was very upset, and I certainly understand, but she assured me that she has terminated her advertising relationship.
Yeah,
with Coos
that doesn't
News.
surprise me. Although, if Diane Rich was running my website, I'd be very concerned about the grammar and think, I hope they're. Wait, Masco Properties website is fine. Yeah. Someone must be overlooking that.
Somebody's writing the content for her, and she just, I don't know what she does. Yeah, I have no idea whether she's just hosts the domain, or I don't know what she does. And then another one that got very upset was a company called Clean Rivers, and Clean Rivers has advertised this, I think, has advertised previous. Now, I don't even know if this comes out every month or every 2 weeks, or I have no idea what her schedule is, because this doesn't say in there, but has had ads previously. But a friend of mine, David Jennings, has picked up a couple of copies, and he went back through, and there was a little picking on drag queens and stuff in one of them, but it wasn't anything like anywhere near
it wasn't calling our schools pedophile playgrounds or anything horrible like that.
Indoctrination,
which is just which is just
it was just disgusting, and I don't think she has any clue the kind of damage she can do.
Oh, I don't think she cares. I don't think they care. They're not operating from a position of interest in community well-being. They're operating in an interest in winning a culture war, and they will leverage any kind of vitriolic propaganda and language to try to win that culture war. And it doesn't matter if it's true or not. It doesn't matter if it's actually a real threat or not, in which case it isn't.
Yeah.
It matters in whether or not they can get people outraged and afraid enough to support these fringe candidates and mainstream their ideas.
Anyway, Clean Rivers had their daughter, Heather Clausen, approach me, and I don't think she and Heather and I will ever be having coffee together, but never say never. But anyway, I did, as I had done for Masco And as I had done for Y Marina, I put a strike through on their thing and updated it to reflect that they did not support this kind of content, and they both claim that they will not be advertising going forward.
So I guess when the June edition comes out, we'll see.
We'll see who's still in there.
Well, one of the things you'll have to check if you are checking is not only whether or not their names are still in there, but you'll want to check and make sure that Diane Rich isn't doing that without their permission. Because I could see that if you lose advertisers, like I've seen with the Faith Festival that's happening on Sunday in Bandon with Restoration Worship Center, sometimes the names pull out and their name stays up on the website or stays up on the publication because the promoter of that is not interested in losing that visibility that the credential that name brings. So it's possible that even if they withdraw funding, that Diane might keep their name on the publication unless they force her to drop it. So that might take some time and effort, and we want to give them benefit of the doubt until we know otherwise.
Yeah. One of the things that I did learn is, I think it was Y Marina in particular brought this up, that they didn't know it was called the Patriot Press Coos News. It was only told to them that it was Coos News, and they thought, oh, it's news about Coos County. It's just news.
Misrepresentation of the product.
Yeah. So they really were not, I don't think Rich was very forthcoming about what this really is. And so I suspect that there's more people involved. I did reach out to Dancia Mast because I learned that she'd actually been in the publication more than once and that she had this ongoing other business relationship with her, and asked her how she can claim that she didn't actually know what was coming out. And she just explained that she never discussed politics or ideology with Diane Rich. It just wasn't a topic of there. She was just trying to promote her business, and she acknowledges that it was irresponsible of her not to do more research before spending. But we all make mistakes. So she and Y Marina have for sure taken responsibility and corrected it. Good on them.
That is good on them.
Yeah.
Does the Geddry publication have business advertisers or sponsors or anything on that publication?
No.
Okay.
We might someday in the future, but for right now, no. And then we had quite a brouhaha on social media. Rob Taylor has chosen to weigh in on his website. I couldn't care less what Rob Taylor says.
Well, he doesn't have as large a following as I think he wishes he had, and it's pretty much an echo chamber over there.
He's just he's a sympathizer with convicted traitors. So like literally, who gives a crap, Rod Taylor?
Well, yeah.
And he wants to demonize a young man for a mistake he made 20 odd years ago at the age of 12. And is that all you got, Rob?
I mean, Rob Taylor's product is outrage. And so he's any opportunity he can find among his ideological opponents to discredit them, to vilify them, any of that, he'll take that opportunity and he'll try to stir the pot and create some outrage around that, and then get his audience to support that. And he has had some success with that. So I do think that it's important to not give him that material, although I think that he'll create it if he doesn't have it, because that's his livelihood. So he will make mountains out of
Yeah.
molehills, and he'll do everything he can. It's disingenuous because it's so ideologically aligned that he's gonna criticize any of his ideological opponents for anything, absolutely anything he can
Yeah.
find, but he won't do the same for those who are on his side ideologically. So there's this like integrity across the board in terms of the process. It's really just about finding ammunition to use against the ideological opponents, and then firing that ammunition, and without regard for who it hits.
Yeah. We're actually coming up on an hour. Do you want to go a little longer? Or?
I think that we can probably wrap things up because we don't want our audience to get too tired. But what we're talking about here, like what you're talking about with this Patriot Press publication and your own publication, Geddry, is we're talking about how local independent media outlets are having an impact on our community. Certainly, Patriot Press trying to leverage advertising dollars to turn the hard-earned funds from local businesses into a tool for their political agenda. And I think some of those businesses are actually politically aligned with them and want to support that, but I think a lot of the businesses probably aren't. And what we're seeing is that I think businesses and people who would otherwise be very opposed to these kinds of fringe ideas are inadvertently helping mainstream them because their business name, for example, Masco, has a really positive, I think a really good reputation in our area, and so Diane Rich has taken advantage of that and turned their hard-earned money and their good reputation into a vehicle to platform her fringe, dangerous, harmful ideas, and so it's really good that Masco has become aware of that and is withdrawing their name and their support for that, because we want to make sure that those kinds of harmful perspectives and promotions remain on the fringe, remain outside the center of our community's discourse. Of course, we want to do for our part, we want to do the job of making sure that these kinds of businesses that are actually positive influences in our community have a voice, that they have a platform where their businesses can be promoted, where their voices can be promoted without being co-opted for positions in politics that they don't actually support. And that means having a pro-democratic platform that doesn't promote one particular political ideology over the other available political perspectives in our community that aren't actively trying to harm their neighbors.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that we can be working on doing, is creating this big tent, like pro-community of platform and voice, where people like Dancia Masco can be confident that their business is being promoted in a way that isn't going to misrepresent their values.
In a positive way, yeah.
And that's where I think like it's important, like for people like me, who I do have very strong political commitments, but I'm willing to withhold those to try to focus on creating a public platform where everyone's voice has the people have the freedom to speak, people have the freedom to debate, and people have the freedom to dissent. And I think that's extremely important for the kind of project that we're building here as a pro-democracy platform.
I have one last thing to share since we're at the 59-minute mark. I checked Diane Rich's Facebook page to see if she had any reaction to the story, because we've gotten several thousand hits on.
Did she share Rob Taylor Report's interpretation of it? Interesting.
No, you're gonna love this. I actually sent it to a few people today. It was fun. I'm just going to do part of it. She says, Coos News has done exactly what it is meant to do. separate the wheat from the shaft. S-H-A-F-T.
Oh, interesting that they're claiming the role of God.
Yeah. Yeah.
Separating the wheat from the chaff is from a biblical parable.
And it's
The
chaff.
person who separates the wheat. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
chaff.
Okay.
It's C-H-A-F-F. It's not even
That's from
chaff.
okay. Yeah.
Yes.
That's funny.
Right.
Yeah. It's from a biblical parable, and it's the role of basically, I guess, the character in the parable sends out servants to separate wheat from the chaff after the harvest. So not, and in fact, there's specific counsel in that parable because they're concerned, right? So there's this. I'll just go over the parable again because I'm religiously trained. I know the story. The parable is about a farmer who has a field, and they sow the seeds, and then in the middle of the night, an enemy of the farmer comes and sows weeds. And so the servants of the farmer, they're like, there's weeds growing among the wheat. We need to go separate that. We need to go pull up the weeds. And the farmer's like, no, if you pull up the weeds now, you will pull up the wheat as well. And it's so not until the harvest, and then he says, okay, go harvest the wheat and then separate the wheat from the chaff. Guess what? That's a parable in the Christian tradition about judgment, about after everything's done.
Yeah.
So for someone to be going out and saying, I'm separating the wheat from the chaff, is they're completely and deliberately disobeying this farmer's command of don't pull up the weeds till after the wheat is ready to harvest, because
till it's
so she's completely misrepresenting the parable. She's playing God at a time when she shouldn't be playing God. Oh my gosh, this is just terrible theology.
So then
Lord
she
have
says,
mercy.
Yeah. Then she says, thanks to the new advertisers and the continued support of those who are tired of the way our country, capital C, is being run, all the best. So we need to see who's advertising in the next edition.
I do think that the advertisers who were listed in the article probably deserve a little bit of outreach to check and see if they're aware of how they're whether or not whether they want their business associated with the kind of content she's putting out, whether they want to be involved in the culture war or not. Because I think that some businesses who might actually even be ideologically aligned with her might be really uncomfortable with their business name being associated with that, because our community is broader than just that fringe ideology, and they might want to have customers who don't actually agree with them ideologically, and so they might want to downplay their ideological alignment. Some of the businesses aren't going to care. Some of them just aren't going to care, but some of them will, and I think they deserve a phone call or an email to say, hey, this is the content of this publication. We saw your business as an advertiser on it, and we want a comment or reflection from you about whether or not that content aligns with your business's values and views, or whether it does not. And if it does not, do you intend to continue to advertise through that publication, or are you going to withdraw and look to put your advertising dollars elsewhere? I do think it would be really beneficial if there was more advertising outlets for our local businesses that weren't ideologically aligned with one political perspective or another. And I think that if that doesn't exist, I know that we have the South Coast Shopper, and we have the World newspaper,
and the World and the Sentinel. Those are
but I think it'd be great to have like little small independent publications like these that aren't specifically geared towards a political agenda, that allow for our businesses to get their name out there and have a public interest focus. Or Oregon's Bay Area page could be, although we do also have a progressive platform there.
Yeah, we do. But part of our stewardship is to focus on the positive things in the area.
Public interest stuff. Yeah, I agree.
We were going to talk about the importance of independent media and analysis, because there's no analysis provided by any of the mainstream media in the area whatsoever.
Right. And we did talk about that a little bit on our first episode 1. So if our audience is interested in that conversation, check out episode 1. And I think
Yeah.
that it's going to be something that we're going to have to continue to bring up from time to
We'll
time because
be going on it now.
yeah.
But we are just over an hour. I think this is the shortest one we've done.
No, our first episode was around 45.
Oh, was it? Oh, God.
Mm-hmm.
God,
Yeah, our longest one was last week. The third episode was about an hour and 15, and so we're hitting pretty close to that. I think when it comes to the content that we have, like sometimes we have to do a lot of research, and then we try to give you every single bit of that research that we did. Like I've done some follow-up on one of the speakers at the Faith Fest, for example. Hey, let's burn some more time talking about that. Remember how there was a speaker who has 6 businesses registered with the state of Oregon? One of them's defunct. The other 5 all share an address, have no business signage, and have no online presence. Well, 2 of those businesses are listed as adult foster care homes. And the DHS has a website where if there are operating foster homes, they have a presence. They're listed on that website so that people who are looking for a care facility for an adult who needs foster care can go to the DHS website and find it. I looked up both of those adult foster homes. They're not on the website. They don't seem to be offering services that I'm aware of. I don't know why they exist. It raises more questions about what this business entrepreneur, motivational, inspirational speaker kind of person is really about. He already claims to be a faith healer. He claims to be a prophet. He has 5 businesses, 2 of them claims to be international ministries with no website, online presence. 2 of them claim to be adult foster homes, no business, no business signage, no online presence. It's sketchy, and I want to give the guy the benefit of the doubt. I'm the sort of person who's going to be like, let's give you the benefit of the doubt, but trust, but verify. And the challenge is this verification. I can't verify, and that's really weird for a business, because usually a business wants to be able to demonstrate that it has services available to the public and get those services out there to make money. I don't know how these businesses make money. Honestly, I don't even know if they really exist other than on paper. So it's really sketchy.
Yeah, they may have done some entities or something.
Yeah. Anyway, we're digressing a little bit, but we're gonna.
It's coming up this weekend, so I'm actually fascinated. Are you gonna maybe visit? Did you have any intentions of?
I'm probably not.
Okay.
I honestly have better things to do with my Sunday. I think it would just be a really. I don't think it's going to be great. I have a feeling that it's going to be a disappointment even for the people that go.
I have a question for you though, since you've been a pastor and you're aware of what is it, the Johnson rules and all that kind of
Johnson
stuff.
Amendment, yeah.
Johnson Amendment. The fact that this event is co-hosted, co-sponsored by the church, the Band and Restoration, and Citizens Restoring Liberty.
That's legal. That's legal. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, churches can be involved in political activity.
Right.
They can even endorse policy positions and measures and things like that. So churches can throw their weight behind certain policy ideas. For example, we've seen the church throw their weight behind anti-choice kinds of legislation and things like that. What churches aren't allowed to do is endorse candidates.
Okay.
And that there becomes some gray areas in what that looks like. So you can platform candidates, you can invite candidates to come speak at your church, but if it becomes pretty apparent that you're only inviting particular candidates from one party, for example, then you might run afoul of the law. It's going to come down to, if it gets reported, it might come down to a legal conflict, your lawyers versus the state's lawyers. But we saw remember back in 2007 when Barack Obama was running, and he spoke at Saddleback Church, but the other candidates spoke at Saddleback too. Like churches are allowed to do that kind of stuff. They just aren't allowed to endorse. If they give equal
time, it's an equal time thing.
They're not allowed to endorse, and they're not allowed to do all of the things that endorsing would entail without, even if they don't actually officially endorse. So their money, they're not allowed to donate to candidates' campaigns. So you can't take money from the offering plate and then throw it to a candidate and say, hey, go
Right.
win your election. That's not to say churches don't do that. The Johnson Amendment gets violated a lot, probably.
Yeah.
There's an element of you have to do diligence in checking and enforcing, and that isn't always happening.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's ways around the rules. So, for example, I think it's very possible that Restoration Worship Center's money can find its way in candidate campaign coffers. It just can't be a direct relationship, like a direct gift. So, for example, if they pay their pastor, if they give their pastor a raise and the pastor decides that the bulk of that raise goes to a particular political candidate, that's the pastor's money. He can do what he wants with it.
Yeah. Somebody just now sent me a copy of the Coos News February 1, 2023 edition. And it's got something in there, the shocking, untold story of the January 6th Coos citizens.
Okay, that sounds like a fun story for another day.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Anyway,
for those of us who've joined us today for our show, we're really glad that we have you. And please, of course, feel free to write in, comment, let us know how we're doing. Let us know if there's any topics of interest or if you have any questions, of course, that you want us to respond to or cover. And yeah, we're excited. This is our fourth show, and that puts us we've been doing this for a month now. Exciting.
Yeah.
Looking forward to continuing the show and looking forward to K-Vision eventually coming on the air and doing the show on the radio.
Yep.
We're just going to keep building from here. So I'm really excited and grateful to be part of this project.
Now, I'm very grateful to have you. You bring a lot to the conversation for sure, and it's a relief. And I want to thank our audience and everybody else, and ditto what he said about sending his comments, and no harassment, just like topic ideas would be great. So,
yeah, just send the harassment my way so I can just ignore it.
Yeah, or we could forward it to.
Yeah, just forward it to me and I'll ignore it. I can actively ignore these kinds of things.
we could forward it to the Coos News.
So. Nah. I don't know if they'd be able to read it.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.